everyone. Hello, everyone. It's 1 o'clock, so we can get started. You've heard us look at me, for those of you that have been waiting, just saying nothing on mute before we get started. But we're now underway. So thanks very much for taking part in today's session. This is a bit of a trip down memory lane. I think it was a couple of years ago we were doing sessions like this pretty much every week, talking about issues to do with cold chain logistics and Brexit preparedness and Brexit delivery. It's been a while since we've actually had focus on this session, and this session was going to take place at our Cold Chain Live conference last month, which was a fantastic sold out event, which we had great engagement and great attendance throughout, and we're very, very excited about it. Unfortunately, on that day was the day that Her Majesty the Queen passed away, so our second day was postponed and moved to virtual, and hence why we've reconvened today. So for those of you that have joined us as a follow-on from the conference, then delighted to have you with us. For those of you that have come along because you've had the opportunity to, because we've been advertising this, then very welcome to you too. So I'm Shane Brennan. I'm the Chief Executive of Cold Chain Federation, and I'm going to be the host of this discussion, which is a chance for us just to talk through with four different experts from different perspectives on this topic, take stock of where we are now with the issues to do with moving goods and trading post-Brexit for the UK, both with the EU and around the world, but we're going to focus very much on the EU because that's where the regulatory issues particularly are. And then we're going to have just an open discussion with that panel about those issues. So to do that, before I do that, I need to sort of remind and say thank you again to the businesses that supported our Cold Chain Live conference, made this session and other sessions possible. So thank you all for your ongoing support for the organisation. So we would have been in the transport zone at the conference, and we would have been, which was sponsored by Thermo King. So thank you very much to Thermo King for their ongoing support. For this session, the rules of engagement. Please ask questions, type them in this question box, and I'll keep an eye on those and put those to the panelists as we move through the session. You do that by typing your questions there. If you particularly have a point you want to make, you think it's important, please put your hand up, and I will, if possible, look to bring you into the conversation. And if you do, then that is how you unmute yourself. So our panel, and don't come on yet panel, I'll bring you in a moment, but just so that everyone knows who we've got. Like I said, we've got a great sort of variety of different perspectives that we're going to be bringing into the conversation, and that includes Soraya from Smithfield Foods, who runs a business that does a lot of importing of goods, moving of goods, a customer of the cold chain, bringing goods in and out of the UK, particularly into UK. Rob from Thermotraffic and Norwich Cold Stores is a business that does a significant amount of customs handling and regulatory controls, as well as storing and moving goods. Julie, my colleague from the Global Cold Chain Alliance, is going to give us the perspective of the rest of Europe, really, about how they see the world post-Brexit from a cold chain perspective. And then Rob Hardy, who, for those of you that are veterans of the Cold Chain Federation discussions on Brexit years, will know Rob very well as one of our most absolute go-to experts on the issues around regulatory compliance and Brexit. So we'll bring those guys in a moment and very much hand over to them to take us through the discussion. But before we do that, just a quick recap. You know, it's amazing that next year will be the 10-year anniversary of the UK's political landscape being dominated by Brexit. Certainly less dominated right now than it was, but certainly the first two conversations about a referendum were in 2013, and obviously. Now we've had a lot of big political milestones in that time. We're on to our fifth Prime Minister since then. We've obviously had the referendum, we've had a series of negotiations at the high political level around things, and the theory or the conversation in 2020 was that Brexit was done, and obviously the theme of this session is Brexit done. I don't think those of us that are involved in the day-to-day of this issue would really agree that Brexit is done. It certainly isn't from an operational point of view. There are still lots of learnings and issues that are unresolved. So in terms of that, of course, whilst it was 10 years of discussion in the media and politics, in reality, there wasn't actually any significant change to our rules until 2020. Then in 2020, pretty much overnight, between, I think it was the 23rd or 24th December when the deal was done, Then on the 31st of December, on the 1st of January, we saw the full customs and SPS control regime imposed by the EU on the UK goods flowing into the EU. So we've been working now for more than nearly 2 years with full customs and regulatory controls for goods coming from the UK into the EU. From the start of this year, from 2021, we've now had pretty much full customs controls in place on goods coming the other way. So the actual, the financial paperwork, the customs formalities have been in place since that time, and we obviously have been working in that environment. The thing that has not been fully implemented is the sanitary and phytosanitary controls. Those specific elements, they are fully in place from a UK to EU perspective, but they haven't actually been implemented to any large degree the other way. Some bits have, but it's still very, very light touch in how it's brought in, and there's sorts of reasons for that, which we'll get into in the discussion. But that creates a sense of, on the fundamental question, is Brexit done? Well, when it comes to goods being imported to the UK from the EU, then Brexit is certainly not done. It hasn't started yet in terms of its regulatory controls in that area. What does it mean for trade? Well, one of the things about understanding the Brexit impacts of trade is that you cannot assess what's happening with Brexit outside of the context of the pandemic and the economic uncertainties and declines that has created. And certainly, if we look at the recovery of food trade, both imports and exports from the UK to the EU, then the experience of the last year has been a significant rebound, but that was from a very, very low base. But we're seeing strong rebounds both out from UK to the rest of the world and UK to EU and vice versa. It's different for different product lines. I think the more you get into the sorts of things we're going to be talking about today, whether it's pork or beef or meat products generally, animal origin products, things are tougher for those products than they are for some of the others. And certainly some of the export markets for things like whiskey and salmon have been a lot better, and they have always been the engine room of the overall UK food trade. And those have a very different market characteristic to everything else. So, it's a mixed picture is the point. But I guess one thing I would say, I think this is a thing that Cold Chain Federation, if you ever hear us talking in the media at the moment, our biggest concern remains over the experience of small businesses that are looking to get their product in and out of over trade. And the thing that happened during COVID during COVID and as a result of Brexit was that small businesses from the UK that were exporting to the EU essentially stopped doing it. Food exporters stopped doing that work. They would scale back their operations anyway, but they actually effectively decided that Brexit controls were too much for them to cope with, and they focused on not other markets, whether it's domestic markets or non-UK markets for their exports. And that has meant that we are operating in a situation where there are overall two-thirds left. One-third have declined of the small businesses that are exporting to the EU who in 2020 are no longer doing so. So that's a significant change in the makeup of the types of businesses that are doing trade across the piece, but particularly in the food sector. And that really comes down to issue around logistics. In terms of the actual global Britain picture, just very, very briefly, obviously the idea, well, one of the big ideas of Brexit is that the UK will establish more of an expansionist approach to trade with the rest of the world. We're now in a situation where we have 71 trade deals with countries around the world and the EU, most of which are rollover deals from what we had previously once we were in the EU, but some of those have had significant improvements, and we have got some other significant negotiations underway. We've also made our intentions clear to want to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or it's called something more complicated than that, but the sort of the economic community around the Pacific Ring, including places like Australia and Japan and others. In terms of the big picture, there was a lot of talk during the early part, 10 years ago, about the opportunities for the UK to establish a trade arrangement with the United States. That is very much in the long grass. I think the real focus in government has been on establishing some kind of trade arrangements with India, and that might well be the theme of the big picture trade discussions in the next few months, certainly from an intentions point of view. But one thing I would say is keep an eye on the Sunak government for its intentions around tariffs. And there certainly has been an ongoing discussion within different parts of government about whether or not there's something the UK could do on a unilateral basis around the way it imposes tariffs, either on a permanent basis or a temporary basis to deal with cost of living. This idea that the UK could actually unilaterally change the nature of its import costs by not having the same tariff regimes as other markets, which would be a pretty radical step, but certainly was under consideration under Truss, I know that. So finally then, just in terms of what we're talking about, I mean, everyone, I'm sure most of our audience are very familiar with the sort of issues around how you organise a logistics chain in a post-Brexit world. But I think this has dominated a lot of my life and a lot of operators' life around how can you design a post-Brexit trading model, whether you're coming inbound or outbound, particularly focused on the outbound in the first few years. And essentially, we are talking about two different models of doing it if you are providing a logistics service. And one is, this is here. One of those is, and probably the way that trade is meant to work when you think about the way controls are built, particularly for SPS controls, it's really about assembling goods together into a consolidation, then taking that consolidation through an approval process, that then being the load that's sealed and sent either on a container or on a lorry through to a port to get cleared and then sent through. That is a particularly difficult thing to do if you're assembling the goods of a number of different customers. And that sort of model and that interruption, those touch points created in the chain, has been one of the biggest headaches to resolve in how we've managed our logistics, or how we plan our logistics and how we execute logistics post-Brexit, certainly on our outbound flows. Now, of course, some of our members in Cold Chain Federation operate groupage models that don't create assembly points, don't have a physical warehouse consolidation point. They do the consolidation on the vehicle. And certainly this model has been the one that's probably been the most of a headache when it comes to understanding how we can run a logistics operation like this post-Brexit on the outbound flows, and also how that might work on inbound. So essentially, a lorry is going around picking up goods from a range of different customers. It's then assembling all those onto it. It's got a full load or a complete load ready to go through the port. It then goes through the port and arrives there. Now, that's all very well if you haven't got a trade border, but if each of those customers and each of those products are very different and they all require their own certification, that creates a significant amount of paperwork that has to be coordinated and synchronized in order for that sort of trade to take place. Then the question, of course, then is if the synchronization doesn't work, if for example, customer B isn't ready, or the VAT hasn't signed off on the goods in the case of POAO, how does that then mean for the rest of that supply operation, particularly if it's very time critical? Or what about if there's errors in some of the paperwork and then that gets picked up at the port of arrival and then the product gets held? How can an operator operate a reliable service when they've got so many dependencies that they're operating to? How can we have a system that services or maintains an opportunity to do this kind of trade? The reality has been, the lived experience has been, that this type of operation for the most difficult goods, particularly products of animal origin that require veterinary sign-off, has been not to do it. So we've seen a dramatic decline in doing this type of trade as a result of Brexit. Now that is, some of that's been dealt with by moving into full load, rethinking supply chains, rethinking supply routes, etc. But some of it's just disappeared. And the question, of course, is as we look forward, how do we take that on? So in terms of the politics, so moving back slightly through my slides, the most important milestone, the most important thing that's happened since the last time we were having these sorts of sessions is really the decision by the UK government in the late spring, to not go ahead with its plan, its long-standing plan to implement SPS controls on goods coming from the EU into the UK, which was supposed to start happening on the 1st of July. It didn't happen. The Cold Chain Federation had a little bit of a hand in that. We were very involved in discussions, both in the media strategy and with government, around the risks that the government was taking on, because we just were very clear that the system wasn't ready at the level it should be to not lead to dramatic declines in trading between the EU and the UK, and the government hadn't really factored in our view, the impacts of that. So we were relieved and supportive when the government decided to suspend its decision to not impose SPS controls in July, starting in July. But the idea is that then created a reboot of the discussions around what does SPS controls for the UK look like for the long term, both from the EU into the UK, but from the rest of the world into the UK as well. And that is the process we're in now. And that is the thing that probably we will discuss most in this conversation we're about to have. What does that mean? How can we take that forward? How do businesses plan for this, given there is ongoing uncertainty in that area? So quickly run through these slides again, lots of builds. So that's the context. Hopefully that's a good overview that sort of gets us in the mood and gets us up to date with where we're at. Can I ask my panelists to join us? So that was my kind of whistle-top summary of things. All these things, summarising anything to do with Brexit is fraught with difficulty, in as much as there isn't simple in any situation. But hopefully you guys felt that was a relatively okay overview of where we're at. Can I start by asking you, Rob and Soraya, probably Rob first, just to give us a sense from your perspective, what's your experience been of the last 2 years of coping with a post-Brexit trading environment between the UK and the EU?
Well, I would actually like to start a little bit earlier as the 2 years, the years before, which was a continuously stop and go of preparations. So as a company, we actually were glad that the decision was made. We could go forward. We thought we were prepared together with our customers, but I think we all experienced that at the end. The decision was so close, and it was actually a big bang. But we managed it. Looking back, we can say we managed it. We spent a lot of time in collaboration with authorities, with our customers, with customs. And it's normal, supply chain reshaping. We all know in our industry that it's taking time. And looking back, we can say, yeah, after 6 to 9 months, the supply chain reshaped, the processes were in place. But then, yeah, looking back, then that was that other moment of SPS checks coming into place, not start preparing. So actually a repeating story of Brexit, yes and no. So the last decision, I think, is good. But it's also now important for us together as an industry and all together, yeah, to provide this clarity for the future to avoid this disruption, I think, of the supply chain, which happened in the first 6 months.
Rob, for the benefit of people, I should have asked this at the start. How much of your, so Thermotraffic, Europe and Holland, and then Norwich Coastal, how much of the goods flows that you're managing are coming into the UK from the EU and going out? Is it sort of 50-50? Are you sort of doing both, or how does that break down?
Well, we actually, I think we were on the 70-30%, 70% from the EU into the UK. We do see, but that's also what you see in what you did show in your slide. We do see even a reduction in, let's say, the flows from the UK into the EU, because due to complexity of that process, especially for the smaller exporters, it's the complexity of the process and cost. And we also believe that this will happen the other way around. We are in close contact with the Dutch food authorities in the preparation for the groupage model. I think we do expect to see a same impact for that part of the trade from the EU to the UK if SPS checks will come into place. The smaller consignments, the smaller exporters will not be able to do their trade anymore.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the areas where we need to dive into more in a moment. Soraya, from your point of view, can you sort of explain what Smithfield Foods' involvement in this is, and how you've coped and what your journey's been through the last few years of coping with the trading changes?
Ours was a little bit different because we're a 100% importer from EU to UK. So for us, it was very much a steep learning curve for everyone. Rob touched on SPS checks, etc., which we've already had to delve into because of safeguarded zones on certain products that we bring into the UK anyway. In all honesty, it was a very tense New Year's Eve that year, and I remember working over that weekend to make sure our trucks were still moving, and we had to get involved with a lot of external support, including obviously Rob Hardy. I'm sure he'll touch on it later as well. We've had Iori's help, we've had agents help, and we've now got more staff in our business than what we've ever had because of the paperwork that we've had to do to be able to continue running as a business.
And is that balanced towards the customs side, Soraya, or on the SPS? I mean, because you've got safeguarded zones. Obviously, the chicken and pork products that you import, and I know it's mainly chicken that you import, have had veterinary controls on them because of the animal diseases and stuff in parts of Europe you trade with. But has it been a customs burden predominantly, or an SPS burden, or both?
A little bit of both, to be honest, because we've got the additional customs paperwork, as we know, we've touched on. But then we've also now got the veterinary checks and certifications that have to come with our goods. So we were prepped for that in Europe, but we never used to use it unless we export out to the Middle East. So now 60 odd trucks coming in a week, every single one and every single product needs its relevant paperwork. So there's a little bit of both. Primarily the additional staff in our business have been for more heavily weighted on customs than veterinary, but that is a part of their role as well. Yeah.
Rob Hardy, you and I are sort of battle scars of the period running into the Brexit, and then obviously now, and then you've probably not had the foot off the accelerator ever since, because of building up a very large business over a breakneck speed in terms of helping business be compliant. Can you sort of summarise where you think we're at now, and based on how we got here, and how the trade is settling down?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to say it's settled down. I think and as Rob and Soraya have said, like we've all sort of molded into this new way of working. I think the danger is we accept that is the new way of working. I think the title of this is Brexit done? I think it's years before Brexit's actually done, and I often liken it to redecorating your lounge. It looks an awful lot worse before you have any opportunity for it to look an awful lot better. And we're still in the awful lot worse zone, to be quite frank. There are still things that we're doing that we have to do because they're the rules. And we saw that there's a sort of view on Brexit that from a customs point of view, and even from a regulatory point of view, that not only have we become a third country to the EU, but the EU has now become a third country to us, and therefore customs clearance and regulatory controls with the EU should be exactly the same as they are with India, the States, New Zealand, Australia, only changed by trade deals. No, that can't be the case. Brexit isn't more of the same. It's actually creating a critical mass, which is the innovation for change. And at the moment, we've not got enough of that innovation for change. If we just do what we were doing before, we've not moved far on from the fax machine. There's still this kind of sending PDFs of documents, and then an agent sits there and does a document, and somebody else does a document, and it's all very much a pass the parcel process where each party's responsibility can't start until the previous party has fulfilled their responsibility, and that can't happen. The one thing we're working very closely with government on is that, and I think we'll all appreciate this, is trade at the moment, and in particular when you look at the UK-EU flows and how difficult that's become, trade is a push at the moment. Everything is on a push basis. You can make some major changes if you turn it to a pull basis. And I think IPAFS is a right move in that direction, because it's a pre-notification and therefore becomes a risking document. And IPAFS is not telling you about something which has been pushed towards you. It's telling you about something you're pulling towards you. And I think if you flip a lot of trade into pull, not push, you can actually deal with the border before there's one of Rob's trucks stuck at it. Not that you do get your truck stuck, Rob, but there's always the risk. But we need to remove the movement of the goods. We just use risking, really, and not every customs entry is.
I guess you would. That would be music to the ears of the government, because they don't have any control over the push side of things, so they only have control over what we pull. So that I think is the sort of way we have to approach it from a mentality point of view, because this is ultimately Brexit is something we did to ourselves. And I guess, and I'll bring Julie in a second, Julie Hansen. I don't think there's a lot of commitment from the rest of the world to help us solve our Brexit problems. So Correct. we need to basically solve it for ourselves, and I guess that's the kind of route. So we've had to do that up to now for the last couple of years. and we need solutions that are going to help us to do that for the future, I guess.
Well, the irony of that, Shades, you're right, is that Brexit makes it a lot easier for people to trade with us and makes it a lot harder for us to trade with anybody else.
Yeah. I'll bring you back in a moment. Julie, just from so Julie, obviously you're obviously talking to cold chain businesses across Europe all the time. Can you give us a sense of how much you've talked about Brexit over the years? I'm assuming you've talked about a lot more in the past than you do now.
Yes, it's faded away quite significantly. Obviously, there have been issues in the very beginning and a lot of hassles and supply chain disruptions. We hardly ever talk about it in the news. You know, generally speaking, across Europe, when you look for Brexit news, there's not so much about it. Talking to the cold chain operators, there are still obviously some issues with paperwork, still some delays, but much less than in the very beginning. It seems like shippers, or some shippers, also continue to build stocks just in anticipation of stricter regulations coming up. I think the fact that the regulations being postponed helped a lot. So it doesn't feel like operators are currently suffering from Brexit. I mean, from the general perception, but Rob could probably speak, better on this.
Rob TT, we have Rob TT and Robbie Ori, okay? Rob TT, do you recognise this message, which is it's remained easy to trade with the UK from the EU, but hard for UK to trade out? Does that colour how European traders see Brexit and whether Brexit's done or not?
Yeah, that's I think a very good conclusion and summary of what it is. And we do hear a lot of talks on level playing fields. And as said, there is still at this moment quite some export and groupage from the EU to the UK. And of course, we are having the documents, and we left and right have delays with our trucks because in supply chains things happens, but the other way around that totally disappeared. I think the process on the European side, and we are also in one of our stores, we are operating a BCP. So also there, that first 6 months was a real challenge. But the main thing what we hear now, actually also from governments, but also from customers and traders especially, is a level playing field. And that why can products from the rest of the world, which are being imported in the EU, being exported to the UK and not the other way around? Such kind of things.
So you mean goods arriving in somewhere like Rotterdam to the EU and then being able to basically move friction less or very reduce friction into the UK market from there, but not be able to come into somewhere like, I don't know, Felixstowe or somewhere and go into the EU from there?
No, will not be accepted by in Europe any longer. So that's a level playing field discussion which is going on. Also, what so far as I know between the UK and Brussels, that conversation.
But in terms of the awareness of the thing that I noticed, or the thing that we were saying to government back in April, May time, going into the 1st July changes, was you've been telling Europe, the government of the UK, have been telling Europe that Brexit is done. That's the message coming out in the media, and yet you haven't actually imposed any controls on anyone yet. So, do you think that we're in a situation where the cheese producers in Italy or whatever are still just don't know that there's going to be these controls at some point for them trading with the UK, or do they have an awareness that it's about to come and they're just waiting to see? I don't know. Maybe Robbie Ori, what do you think about that?
They knew they were coming. They were massively grateful that they were suspended or postponed. I think Italy was a really good example because Italy tends to be lovely little artisan cheese producers, and it's pick up here, pick up there, and it's very, very, very regional. Those were really in danger of when SBS controls come in, you wouldn't want to be a delicatessen in London because you're not going to get half the stuff you used to get. It's because the artisans would just stop, and you'd lose that edge. And there's no reason why we should do that. So yes, they were aware. Some blissfully unaware. I have to say that there's not everybody was aware, but generally speaking, they were fearful of it and just kind of saying, well, that's the end of that, really. Because the consolidation is only physical. Unless you can make the consolidation also fiscal, then there's kind of you can't consolidate anymore. You can do the milk runs or you can do the hub to hub stuff, but if there's still a number of consignors and a number of consignees, there's still massive layers of complexity in terms of the paperwork. It's just physically the goods are moving like they used to, but fiscally it's a disaster. The one we don't touch on, because it's not particularly unique to SPS, although it is for an odd reason, is the fact of delivered duty paid also killed off a lot of the small producers. Because when you go into the delivered duty paid, as a UK exporter, a UK importer is much more likely to accept anything other than delivered duty paid, because we voted for Brexit, we self-harmed to that degree, so let's make sure we make it easy. But the EU didn't, so suddenly they said, well, I just want the stuff like I had it before, and now I want it delivered duty paid. And of course the small producer now needs a VAT registration. Many didn't even recognize that there was VAT on the product in Europe, because there's not VAT on the product in the UK, and missed that point completely.
Yeah, I mean, and just this the idea of having to create European-based businesses and also maintain business as usual feels like one of the strategies that suddenly everyone was presented with. And I think on your point about, there are lots of businesses that are ready and are tracking this. People that are watching this are the sorts of people that are keeping their eyes on whether things are needed to be on Brexit. I think what was striking to me was on the, we'd spoken about nothing else. News bulletin after news bulletin for months was Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. And yeah, we got to the 1st of January and there were lots of traders suddenly going, we have to do something, which was surprising. And that was in the context of the UK at the height of it, when it was global news that the UK was leaving the EU. Now there isn't global news. Brexit's done. It's all been they happened years ago and it's carrying on. So I do think we still face this huge risk on the date at which we do start putting in place UK controls on EU imports, that there's going to be a lot of a significantly higher percentage of traders that aren't ready or aren't aware at that point. Sorry, can I ask you?
Yes, I agree.
You're importing. You are obviously 100% importing in from the. Were you ready for the 1st of July or ready for the controls at that point? Would you say? Would you if we were now requiring that of you, would you be able to cope?
In part, yes, but we would have had one of our largest categories of our business go under, because there was a prohibited goods list that came out for the 1st of July, and marinated chicken, of all things, was on there for some reason. And obviously that's a massive import from EU, primarily from Poland, for many businesses that bring into UK marinated chicken for the food service industry. So yes, we were ready in regards to the vet certifications, because for us, thankfully, as an EU business, we do export worldwide and we already have vets on sites, etc. But as Rob has already touched on, many smaller businesses wouldn't have that in place, but we would have lost one of our most profitable, biggest customers potentially, because of the Prohibited Goods Act. And we spoke to a lot of governing bodies. I know Shane, I know you and I spoke about it, and tried to get into some MPs input as well as DEFRA, and there was no justification for that prohibited goods. They couldn't categorically say, I don't know, Brazilian chicken, this is why we don't do it in this country, this is why we're going to safeguard it. There was nothing there, so it was very tense for us. And it's been kicked, but it's only been kicked down the road, and we will sit again on the 31st of December next year waiting to see, is it going to be in place on the 1st or is it not? And I think that's where, as a government, we do lack a little bit of that forward thinking for these businesses, that for us maybe we would survive, but other businesses may not if they don't know how to prep for it properly.
That's a really important point. And Rob TT, you mentioned this earlier, I think in your intro part, about living to deadlines, working to deadlines, trying to build a business around preparing for deadlines. What do you think is the overall impact of that on business strategy? Whether it's logistics businesses like yourself or your customers, where are they at in their headspace around this stuff? Do you think they're still willing to continuously plan and invest in thinking about these things, or or not? I mean, how do you see that playing out?
Well, I can actually, when I speak from experience with the stop and go, I think you as a business, you come to a moment where you say, well, okay, it's being postponed for the third time. Do we start preparing again for next year, 23, or do we just leave it to the last moment? And this is actually also what we actually see within our customers. It's people getting a little bit of business, do the other strategy, and okay, we will deal with it when the decision is clear. And I think
I certainly recognise the idea that the first time around, it's like cry wolf. The first time around, a large percentage of businesses spent a lot of time and effort and diverted a lot of attention onto being ready. The second time around, some didn't. Those who didn't were laughing and were very proud of themselves for waiting. Then the second time around, a significant percentage more didn't then prepare in the same way. Third time around, a significant amount more. So you worry about the fourth and fifth times, particularly with the gap, how much businesses out there in the customer base are going to be willing to put a lot of effort into a deadline that the UK government hasn't got a lot of credibility in sticking to.
Well, we were giving that advice out. Sorry, Rob. Sorry.
Right, so go ahead, Rob.
We were giving that advice out, but our neck was way on the block, and people were saying we need to do this, we need to do that. I said, stake my career, it doesn't happen on the 1st of July. But we'd had no insider information other than you got the feel that it just wasn't likely to happen. And of course, it not only did it take up everybody's time, if you start to plan for it, Rob's completely right, it takes your time up too. And you're sitting there going, it's not going to happen, guys. It's not going to happen. Nobody's ready for this behind the scenes. And of course, we've still got the safety and security declaration.
A very specific tactical point that you and I were discussing a couple of months ago is this issue, and it's not actually a trading rule. It's a food safety rule. But the rule was going to be that, I think it was 1st of October, wasn't it? You had to have listed on your ingredients for the product, or the product label, to have a UK address on it from the 1st of October, said the rule, because that's what requires a third country. And the question was, well, if you're importing that good, particularly on a delivery duty paid basis or whatever, and the owner of the goods is based in Holland or something like that, can you put the freight forwarder's address on there? Yes or no? And the answer from a customer's point of view was probably yes, but from a food safety point of view was a no, and it wasn't at all clear. And there wasn't anyone really trying to lead a conversation around how we're going to implement that. And ultimately it didn't happen because no one had really had a solution.
Yeah, because one is everybody just thought that's never going to happen, and then what's the recourse if it does happen? But we were looking at it on sort of a brass plate service in the background, saying we can just register your office here and all that. But is all that really necessary, you know? But from the government's point of view,
it's not necessary from the point of view of, is that a good way to support food safety? No.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's just papering over all the cracks they keep appearing. But the other side of it is that it's not fair on industry, because labeling is not something you do at the last minute on your product. You've got this in stock, and we're trying to change the rules on labeling with 2 weeks, 3 weeks notice is suddenly an operation of somebody applying stickers to jars. And you think, no, this can't happen.
Julie, I know this is it's a very broad question. I don't know if you have an answer to it or not, but do you think that European operations, whether they are food businesses or they are cold chain businesses, are starting to see the UK as outwith of Europe? Are we at a point now where UK is a separate market to Europe when it comes to producing goods, running departments of supplier companies, running transport operations? Do you think that there is a physical separation now, sort of 2 years on?
I think there is more concern about the difficulties of having a lean supply chain and undisrupted one than it was before, obviously, because of all the paperwork constraints and import-export issues. What I wanted to say as an add-on to what Rob said earlier about level playing field, there is a challenge for operators across Europe, because mostly the government in countries interpret the regulations from the EU in a different way. So it is applied differently in various countries at the point of entry, which creates unfair competition between ports and hence between operators. So that is probably one of the challenges that operators are dealing with mostly across Europe these days. Yes.
This is the point. When you have a customs, when you have a booth, and literally a physical booth, and someone's manning that booth, it's not even about one port being different to another port. It's one shift being different to another shift. It's what someone who's got up and had a nice breakfast this morning on Monday, but had a terrible one on Tuesday, and therefore is in a different mood. And that's the reality of once there is that interruption point in the system, that then creates inconsistencies. And I mean, Rob, that's your life, hasn't it been, Rob Hardy, dealing with that kind of thing?
It absolutely is. But our argument is always that, you know, a customs entry is risked and routed according to the data that's on it, you know, and not all goods are examined. And an SPS should be the same. You know, that it should just be a case of the one I always use. We don't work with them, but I always use a truck full of Baby Bell. A truck full of Baby Bell cheese today is a truck full of Baby Bell cheese tomorrow. Really? How many pieces of Baby Bell cheese do you want to look at before you actually say, let's just risk profile that one? And when you actually put the documentation through, we'll decide whether or not we want to have a look at it. And if we want to have a look at it, we'll do this, that, and the other. We just want a bit of comfort, but that's the whole point of the documentation. The documentation is there for you to risk profile. But at the moment, what we're saying is there's potentially something that's bad. So everything's bad. We're going to have documentation for everything. I mean, that's pretty ludicrous, really. But otherwise, you know, not every customs entry is checked. The documents checked. And I mean, it's less than 3%, and less than 0.5% are examined. So what's the problem?
Can you? I mean, Rob,
why can't we do the same?
you can do this. I think at this point, can you sort of summarise how you understand the state of play as it sits today? You know, the Sunak administration and its approach to delivering on dealing with these legacy issues of Brexit and the still to be decided elements. Do you have a sense of where we're at, or can you summarise broadly what the process is? Or we had an interruption in July. Where are we now, and are we looking towards the end of 23? Is that right, for things to be brought in?
Still at the moment it's 2023. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes on single trade window and how do we make things a lot easier with one data field and all this type of, one data input, lots of processes off the back. But there's also a feeling, even with single trade window, that's going to be an optional process, because government doesn't want to particularly, well, the sort of mood music is they don't want to impose another change on the industry. You've just had Brexit, you've just had SPS on, off. I haven't got safety and security declaration in yet. I could see that one coming, and maybe risk profiling a bit more on the safety and security deck. And then, of course, you just had CDS, which some people have managed very well, fine, and other people are still having lots of problems with CDS. And we haven't done CDS exports yet. So there is a feeling in the back, so we can't change anything else, guys. You know, there's enough going on here, so we don't want to impose anything else. But also there is a real desire behind the scenes to say, how do we make this as easy as we can? There was a real irony of the whole thing of when we left the EU, we became more UCC compliant than we've ever been, even when we were in the EU and were governed by the UCC. So because I think it was just nobody knew any different. So everybody got the rule book out and said, what does the rule book say? And it's the practicalities are starting to come through now. We're actually saying, there's a way of doing this.
The story of the UK in Europe was always that we took the rule book that was produced by the EU and followed it to the letter when we were members.
Yes.
And whereas other countries didn't have necessarily the same sort of literal approach to implementation of EU regulations and more focused on outcomes, etc. And we've probably taken some of that habit into the post-EU world as well.
Yeah, we have. Because we didn't know any different, to be fair, is that we saw that initially. We were doing UK-Ireland movements into the Republic of Ireland, were very, very, very difficult in the early stages, because a lot of the Irish processes, they did more customs entries in January 21 than they did in the whole of 2020. They processed more customs declarations in 1 month than the previous year. And of course, people don't know enough about the process to use discretion. So they go to the book. Everybody opens the book, and it's like working to rule constantly. And they weren't meaning to, but their only confidence was in the printed form. So it's changed now.
If you don't have a sense of what the strategy is, you do then end up looking at the specifics and to deliver. Don't get caught out by doing something wrong. In terms of so we know that I think that the reality of the political situation is that we were working towards a track. There was a decision on the 1st of July to not go ahead with the SPS controls in their current form. There was a piece of work then created, which is called the Target Operating Model design, which was going to take place with a view to it being published at some point like now-ish. Was the idea in July. There would be a draft model for how it would work, and then a year's worth of refinement, and then a delivery in 2023. Obviously, since then, we've had 2 different prime ministers and 2 different secretaries of state in all the key jobs out, and that means that they've had to rebrief. And I know literally I was on a call this morning where they were saying, well, we did brief the DEFRA, which is responsible for food safety in the UK. We briefed our ministers and we're ready to go, but now we've got to start again because we've got new ministers. So that's created an interruption in the flow of things, and these ministers will have a say on what they think is good or not. Rob, TT, can you give us a sense of blank sheet of paper? What are you hoping the UK government will do with SPS controls in the end? Oh, you've gone mute. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I think they need to be prepared and find a model for the groupage part, and it should be risk-based. But that discussion is going on. What is the risk-based and what is the role of the trader? And for sure,
and I think so. I think my characterization of the debate that's been happening over the last few months is that there's a lot of hope in DEFRA and in the food people that they can classify a lot of goods as low risk. They want to put as many goods as they can, product lines, into the definition of low risk, and therefore, because you are a cereal box, a box of cornflakes, you are low risk. That's a low risk for you product. Therefore, it doesn't need any significant. The UK government does not require a certain amount of declaration around SPS controls, and won't do any controlling at the border of that type of product. And then it will try and push that definition as far as it possibly can within the feasibility of what is. And then, but for everything else that isn't low risk, either medium risk or high risk, they will require pretty much the same model of control as there is now. But then there's another camp that argues, and this is more of a cabinet office, I would say, argument around trusted trader. So rather than worrying about the product, worrying about the business that's doing it and trying to give a great deal of autonomy and trust to the businesses that are doing that moving, whether that's the product owner or logistics company, and predominantly they mean the product owner. In the balance of that, I don't know, Soraya, from your point of view, do you have a sense of across those 2 things where you would hope that they would come out?
I think there should be a mix of both, in all honesty, because I think we could be a great trusted trader, but say if we bought from outside market, the product necessarily might not be what we believe it could be. I would hope, as Rob mentioned, importing, I say, chicken for a massive retailer in the UK to then importing it the next day, they're the same thing. If you've got the same farm, you've got the same feed, you've got the same factory, there should be a little bit of that common sense and understanding of what we have. But I do believe, and I might be the wrong consensus here, but I don't think SPS checks are necessarily a bad thing if they are required, but it's having the facility of the government, the border control points, to process it through quickly and efficiently with product that's perishable, and making sure that it's coming through and it's actually being checked for a specific reason, not held for 9 hours and then going, oh, actually, sorry, we apologise, you can leave now, which we've actually had on trucks, pulled aside, and there was nothing checked. The back of the doors of the lorry weren't even opened, but we lost then 9 hours of time. So I would love to see a good compromise of a little bit of both. A trusted supplier, facilitator. You've got very, very good 3PLs that you can work with who have their own safeties and security checks, but as well as knowing that day in, day out with what that product in. Baby Bells is quite good. Something like Baby Bells is having that in every day. It's not going to change day in, day out, so
yeah, or something like that. But I mean, Rob, is that possible? I mean, is the answer to have SPS controls but just not at the border?
Yeah, 100%.
Says Culture.
Yeah,
Culture Federation line 101. But yeah, do you think that's possible? Is it about digital? Is it ultimately about the best system we can build?
We've always, since day one, in fact, way before day one, we've always said, where's the border? It's not where you think it is. The border is wherever you want it to be, providing you can control the flow. So when we cleared it, when I was running the terminal down at Dover, that wasn't in the port of Dover. It was 1.5 miles away from the port of Dover, but it was in the same postcode. But it could have been 100 miles away from the port of Dover. It didn't matter. Everything was driven that way for customs clearance because that was the process. And what we're actually saying is, if that can be 1.5 miles away, it's outside of the port zone. If you could do that, why can't that be anywhere? Why does the control have to be?
Well, I think we've got there pretty much on customs, haven't we? I think I know there is BCP
well,
and
yes and no.
more or less.
We clear nothing at the frontier, zero at the frontier. But we're quite unusual on that. But we just took a view of doing it that way, and we do. There's a sort of percentage of full frontier declarations, and then the simplified processes, which is the other option. We are 99.9% simplified processes because we don't see the point of stressing it somewhere. We don't use the inland border facilities and what have you because they don't need to really. Just do it. There's another way of doing it. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but there is another way of doing it. And SPS should be the same, I think.
So Rob TT, then, from your point of view, obviously you literally have a stake in the game. You do the forwarding. You've got the facilities both in Holland and in UK. Do you think you could be a border? You could have border services happening at your facilities rather than at the border?
Yes, I fully believe in that because that's actually what we operate in Rotterdam and what's being operated in other ports. So we have hosted, I think even already 4 years ago, members of parliament in Rotterdam, and we also suggested again people of DEFRA to visit Rotterdam to see how that's being done and how it's being controlled.
And are you talking about the Eurofrigo facility or more than that?
Yeah, the Eurofrigo facilities, there is where we operated the border control post, but also in the Antwerp port, of course, the border control posts are not being operated by private cold providers, but it's actually the same model. It's in the middle of the port, and that's the border. But the drive to that border control post can be 20 miles.
The Dutch have done a very good job of creating a very large geographic definition of what a port is.
But I think that's a matter of fact. But 20, 30 years ago, when you entered goods into the UK, there were checks in Charing. The veterinary checks were in Charing, and the trucks were arriving in Dover. So it's actually going back 30 years back in time and doing the paperwork again and doing the checks inland. So I really believe that must be an option to do checks inland as long as the process is being controlled.
I think if I was to predict for those watching, those of you thinking, what are the answers here? I think the biggest answer of, is Brexit done is no. But then, when will we know when it's done? Not yet, because I think there's we're in a little window of time where we're waiting to see what this latest iteration of this government thinks about the future and how long, whether it's happy to carry on with a bit of a grey area for longer than that 23 period, or whether it wants to push things through to a more decisive outcome sooner. I guess if they were to make a decision quickly, my fear is that we'll end up in a situation where they try and put a lot of weight on the press release that says 70% of the food goods are not going to be controlled, and thereby defining as much as they can as low risk goods. And I think the problem with that is that the thing that won't get through on low risk is anything with animal origin. So whether it's meat, dairy, or dairy containing goods, they're going to be, and I worry that where we are right now is we're going to be in a world where you're either fine and you actually carry on and nothing really changes from the EU importing point of view, or if you are required, you're going to have quite a lot of control to deal with, and that's going to have quite a distortionary impact on some trade, unless there's some more radical thinking that wins out within government at this stage. I don't know. I mean, that's my summary of things as they're playing out now.
I think that's fair. And a really dangerous zone is if you're in the pet food business, because that's super controlled, so it doesn't become human food. So we have a lot of controls of pet food moving backwards and forwards to Ireland, and it's one of the most controlled. So yeah.
So I'm conscious of time, and if I start talking Brexit, it can go on forever. And I think diminishing returns in terms of the attention span of the people that are watching this, and people like us probably could go on for a lot longer. Whereas I'm sure a lot of people will be saying, no, we've had enough of it now. They're getting flashbacks. But then thinking about this in the context of the wider piece, then just as some final thoughts from you all, do you have confidence that we can get through this window of time, basically that we are resilient enough already in how our operations work, that we can provide solutions for this kind of post-Brexit British trading environment? Rob, do you want to sort of work from your perspective?
Rob Iori, Rob. Yeah.
Rob Iori, yes, that'll be you, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think we're where we are at the moment, we could all continue like this quite happily. We just have some hard days and easy days, but where we're at is okay. You know, everyone's got used to it, and that's what it's going to be. If there are some changes on SPS imports, that's definitely going to be a challenge, and I think there needs to be some joined up thinking from the UK side, because it's the UK's decision here. I think we're going to be very driven by the next election date. Everything else should be getting easier. Go back to my original point, really. Don't sit on your hands now and start accepting what we do today as being good enough. I don't think it is. I think there's more to do. So I think we're going the right way. The mood music is all we want to continue to make things easier, and at the same time sort of layer in these SPS and safety and security controls without killing the deal, really. So it's data. For me, it's data. Everything's just about data. If they can get more supply chain data transparency, they'll get more confidence, and if they've got the confidence, they'll call that a check.
Yeah, and Sarai, from your point of view, are you comfortable and confident about the next sort of couple of years ahead?
I think a similar view to Rob, really. If we could get the infrastructure behind it, I think we would actually be quite good at SVX checks, customs paperwork. Let's move away from the wet copy signatures of everything and move with like modern times. I think once that's in place and the government has a good system that doesn't crash or doesn't go down every Tuesday night, that would be great for us, you know. And I think as a country, it will take time, as we can see now. It takes time, but we would get there, and I think we will just get better at it as things go on. And we definitely shouldn't, and I agree with Rob, we shouldn't accept how it is now. We should be evolving with it and kind of saying, right, this is what we do now, but let's move on to a fully, I don't know, cloud-based system that works across, you know, no matter where you are, type of thing. So we'll get there. Not done.
Thank you, Sarai. So Rob TT, you know, really good, professional, experienced cold chain logistics providers are really the solution to the problem, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually what Robert and Soraya are saying, and one of the most important thing, I think, in the preparation or the next step with the SPS control on the joint up thinking, and the joint up thinking should also be with the European authorities, because that's what went wrong, I think, the other way around. And actually, vets not willing to speak with each other, I think that's the way. So the model and the thing should be developed in a joint up thinking together. And I think that's very important.
Yeah. And Julie, obviously, UK businesses talking to the European counterparts and making sure we're continuing to discuss these sorts of issues is the key, isn't it? And we can do that through Global Cold Chain Alliance relationships, can't we?
Sure, definitely.
And just a quick plug for the next meetups at GCCA.
We have an event coming up in November in Athens from the 21st to the 23rd in conjunction with the Greek Cold Chain Conference.
Yeah, and then next year in March, we've got the European conference in
Barcelona.
Barcelona.
Yes, sunny destination.
And I think, you know, from the point of view of making sure we're continuing to talk across supply chain across logistics operators is really important. And in terms of the post, we've left Europe doesn't mean we have to leave. We've left the European Union doesn't mean we have to leave Europe. So let's carry on on that basis. Okay, so just quickly wrapping up. Thank you all very much for your time and for all the panelists. A brilliant discussion. I find it very, very useful to catch up on where we're at, and there'll be lots more to talk about. We'll be providing updates as a federation on an ongoing basis throughout as things develop, and there will be developments probably this side of Christmas that it's worth making sure we're across. This was obviously one of our Cold Chain Live catch-up events, but we've got another one next week or 2 weeks' time on the 15th of November on people and resourcing the cold chain. So please look out for that and sign up for that if you can. And thank you again to the partners in our Cold Chain Live conference that made this event possible. So thank you all very much to you, Julie, to you, Soraya, to you, Rob TT, and to you, Rob Hardy. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you very much. Thank you.